You know, Chris, whenever you're implementing anything, it's a good idea to have an understanding of what all the terminology is.
Absolutely, it avoids misunderstanding.
Well, and can I just say, some of the terminology are acronyms, and I love it when there is an acronym embedded in an acronym, and we'll get to that one. When you see a lot of terms, I suppose it's a good idea to be able to break them down into three major areas, and I suppose you could call them administrative tools to start off with. Commercial terms and technology terms. Now, that you're never going to see that within the Tippett environment. So it's more about us just kind of getting our heads around it as such. So why don't we start with the kind of the administrative or almost business function terminology. We hear the term enterprise used a lot. Now, to me, an enterprise is either a starship, showing my nerdiness, or it's a very, very large organisation. But what does it mean in Tippett terms?
Okay, so inside the product, an enterprise is, if you like, the largest administrative entity that owns resources.
Right.
So every customer who acquires Tippett as a service will be at their largest level an enterprise.
Okay, so even if you're 20 people in an organisation, that's still an enterprise. You don't need to be 2,000.
That's right.
It's different terminology. Within an enterprise, there are sites. So what are they?
Okay, so
or groups even.
Yeah, so importantly, we need to understand that within the actual underlying technology, the software on which Tippett is built, they call the next level down a group. Tippett calls it a site. Means the same thing as far as we're concerned. But if you like, that is one locality, and it consists of all of the resources within that one locality. Right. So it's numbers, it's users, resources, like handsets and those sorts of things are all assigned to a site.
So the enterprise could be an organisation with offices in 3 or 4 locations, and a site is one of those locations.
That's right. So they would have 4 sites if they were all using Tippett, or if you want to think of it this way, 4 groups. But site is the name you'll hear us talk about most often.
Let's go down another level of granularity then to an individual. They're called a user.
Yes, although a user isn't necessarily a human in this case. A user is an entity that has a phone number. Right. It has some sort of client of Tippett, so it could be a handset, or it could be a soft client, or it could be an app, or whatever the case is. So it's that collection of resources, if you like, allocated to one individual entity that can receive or make phone calls and so on.
All right, let's get into some acronyms. First one, CEA. What's that?
Okay, Customer Enterprise Administrator. So what the CEA is an authorised administrator who can administer the enterprise down.
Right, person.
In this case, yes.
And a CGA?
Customer Group Administrator. And this is why it's important to understand that synonym between site and group is because within the technology it's called a Customer Group Administrator. Right. And a CGA can administer one site.
Okay, so a CEA is probably looking after the entire Tippett environment.
Correct.
And a CGA is doing stuff within, I don't know, one of the suburbs in which an office
or within that office, Right. And here's the thing, the CEA can do everything the CGA can do, but not vice versa.
Of course. All right, let's look at some of the commercial terms. And the big one here is what a service pack is.
Yeah.
And there's a bunch of stuff underneath that, right?
Well, what we have is a whole bunch of synonyms for service pack. And when I say synonyms, what I mean is within the documentation, you'll see these things referred to under slightly different names. So a service pack, also known as a user pack, or a license pack, or a feature pack, is fundamentally the collection of capabilities that an individual user or capabilities and services that an individual user can use. So in this particular case, if you have a user that is connected to, say, an executive level handset, you might give them an executive service pack to go with that. And that includes the license in order to use Tippett. It includes a whole bunch of features that handset can use, as well as the user being able to do things that are perhaps slightly more powerful and functional.
So, Chris, I've also seen within service packs there's kind of another set of terminology, regular and supplementary. So what does that mean?
So every user will have at least one regular service pack. Generally what happens is that you can then combine that with supplementary packs which give you additional functionality.
Let's now look at technology. We're getting into, I can see that the sense of excitement coming up with you now. All right, so let's start with Tippett, right? That's a starting point. And one of the first things that you come up with is Tippett over whatever. And I suppose the traditional one is Tippett over NextIP, or MPLS network,
That's right.
multi-protocol label switching, if you really wanted to know that.
Well, this has become more important as Tippet over the internet has been added to the suite of capabilities. So the importance about understanding the access method, whether it's over NextIP or the MPLS,
yep.
which is sometimes how it's also represented, or over the internet, is that the addresses, some of the configuration settings and other things, plus the actual path to Tippet, will all vary according to whether you're using NextIP or internet to carry your traffic. So what you'll find is that when you order an individual user, and we're going to see this in an upcoming video, when you order an individual user, it becomes important to nominate in advance which way they're going to come in.
Why is that, Chris?
Because within the Tippet cloud environment, the actual configuration will vary according to which of those the administrator nominates when the user's ordered.
Right. Okay. So Tippet over NextIP or Tippet over the internet. Sometimes you might see that as TOTI, right?
Yeah.
Tippet
or
over
TOTI.
the internet,
Yeah.
TOTI or whatever.
Yeah.
That's an acronym embedded within an acronym. So Chris, let's get into some terminology that's a bit more kind of related to us. The first one's handset. I don't know about you, but handset just sounds like telephone to me.
And fundamentally it is. I guess we're being a little bit more sophisticated than simply saying it's a telephone, because we're implying, if you like, that it's a SIP-capable telephone that can communicate over an Ethernet network, or in some cases it might be through a DECT connection or maybe Wi-Fi.
Right.
But fundamentally, the SIP client means it communicates natively with Tippet. In the case of the other types of telephone, if we qualify it by saying analog handset, it means that we're using some sort of adapter in the middle.
Yeah, okay. Now, the opposite of that, I suppose, if you can call it an opposite, is a soft client.
That's right. Well, in this particular case, we're talking about something like a PC, or these days you can get soft clients for other devices. You know, you can even have a soft client on a phone, a mobile phone. So in these cases, the soft client is a full SIP capable client, but in this case it's running as an application on a host device like a PC or possibly a smartphone or a tablet.
Okay. Is it an app, or is an app treated as something different?
Well, we're probably talking about apps in the context of devices like smartphones and tablets. The reason that I've separated app out is because in some cases there are apps that you will use in your Tippet journey that are not there to take and make phone calls per se.
Right.
They're there to control things like presence and also how you are represented to the rest of the organisation, such as, you know, as I mentioned, presence, but status more generally, but for controlling how calls are forwarded and things like that. So I've sort of separated app out to just show that sometimes an app is not a client in the sense that you can't make and take phone calls.
It's used to do something
That's
else.
right.
Okay. What about IAD?
Okay, so integrated access device. Remember where I talked about that analog telephone example a little while back? Well, an ATA or analog telephone adapter is one example of an IAD. It sits in the middle. It turns an analog telephone into something that can talk to Tippet.
Right, okay. Now, I know the last one that we're going to talk about today is a key expansion module. And everybody keeps calling it CHEM.
Yeah.
I was wondering,
and I'm as guilty of that
honestly,
as anyone.
When I first came across it, I thought, what chemicals do you need in this environment? Not knowing it was spelt with a K in essence. But key expansion module, that's pretty simple, isn't it? It's like add a whole pile of extra buttons to your handset.
Yeah, sometimes called a sidecar.
Right.
And that's fundamentally it. Now, the nice thing about them is as they have become more sophisticated, I mean, in the end, they are just a bunch of buttons on the side of a phone.
Yeah.
But, you know, you can now have individual pages which can be accessed using other buttons on the same sidecar or same CHEM. But you can change the display names and you can program them so that the types of things each button does can be a little bit more than just speed dial this guy. It could be I'm going to be able to park calls on that button.
Yeah.
Or it could be that I'm going to watch the status of other lines and services on a particular button. So all these things add to the capability and the sophistication and the, if you like, the usability of the Tippet environment, and particularly when you're using handsets like that.
So I hope that's given you a kind of a broad overview of the types of terms that you're going to see in your Tippet journey. If you come across any others that we haven't spoken about now, check the Tippet website or have a look at some of the user guides. You will find some further information in those.